Hello, and thanks for your time. Questions for you. How do you see mankind's future unfolding? Do you like what you see? More importantly, how is it influencing your life? How's that dream thing working out for you? My name's Gary and this is Kevin, and we're here to talk with you about something different. We're not here to talk about the same old problems. You already know them. We're here to have a different conversation with you. We see on the news people in the streets, people wanting change, people wanting something better. But really what people may be failing to understand, that there's different definitions for change.
There's structural change, which would be social, political, economic, cultural. Then there's what the alchemists would consider the most important change, evolutionary change.
Yes, and what we're going to do is we're going to pick up on this a little bit. We're going to define structural change a little bit for you. Structural change is nothing more than adding to or taking away. And we see things are being taken away. Just ask our friends in Europe, especially those that live in Greece and in Spain. Structural change is a form of negotiation where someone gets something out of the deal. It produces cycles. It's relatively safe because it's nothing more than structure changing itself, and it's predictable, and it fits the predetermined outcomes, and the paradigm is never affected. Then there's something that's called fundamental change, and this is what Kevin brought up, is evolutionary change. And this is very seldom talked about, nor is it introduced into a culture, because fundamental change is mankind himself evolving and creating a new paradigm. And we can relate this back to alchemical expression of changing lead into gold, where mankind becomes better than what he presently is by the introduction to another form of knowledge. And it is from this other form of knowledge that is allowed new ideas and new potentials to be expressed. And its outcome is never known. It's non-predictable, because it's the birth of something new. It's man creating a new paradigm. So this brings us to the point two, is, have you ever heard the term or the statement that knowledge is power? Well, this is relatively short and a relatively meaningless statement because it never defines the word knowledge. Maybe what we could say, let's expand this a little bit. Maybe what we can say is that is who or what that determines what knowledge is to be transmitted and believed in, that shapes the rule from which a organization of concepts or paradigm is created that limits mankind's potentials and determines our limitations. And it's all about the concepts, the continuation of the concepts that's important, because it is that paradigm that rules the age.
I would agree with that. And even the minds that talked about a cyclical way of thinking, that because information is transmitted in such a way that it just gives us cycles.
And what the minds would also say too, that only changes when there's an introduction of something new. What we got here too, as we think about ideas of something new, is why is it that history always repeats itself? Maybe there's a reason for this. Maybe history repeats itself because it's a repetition of knowledge that supports an organization of concepts or a paradigm that makes us believe this is the best we could do or the best we can be, that keeps us playing this rigged game. And it's all about power, control, and predictability.
Predictability based on the transmission of information, which supports the structure as opposed to enhancing the individual.
Exactly. So my name's Gary, and this is my colleague Kevin, and I'm the author of Alchemy for the 21st Century, The Rebirth of Resistance, and we're here to talk with you a little bit about alchemy today. But let me define the program a little bit for you. Alchemy for the 21st Century is the idea of bringing ancient concepts that were forgotten in time up to the 21st century for review. The rebirth of resistance is mankind's awareness that things aren't working in his favor anymore, and it has produced the responses that we're seeing throughout the world. The only problem here is the responses are predictable.
They're predictable because people are using the same information that's being transmitted from the structure, trying to change the structure with structural information when they need a new paradigm or an evolutionary way of thinking.
Yes, so let's talk a little bit about alchemy. And first of all, one of the places to start with would be the age of alchemy. Alchemy is a very old thought. Matter of fact, it can be considered ancient. Many believe that it began in medieval times, but that's not exactly true because alchemy can be linked back to the Egyptians. So I even like to think of alchemy as even older. So what we could say here is that what we have is a medieval interpretation of an ancient idea that at one time was transmitted globally and with similar themes. So what we can say too is maybe alchemy at one time has touched all cultures, and it is the commonality that we all have that is never celebrated or expressed, because it's better in this age to focus on the differences, because that keeps the conflicts alive and well, and it makes it necessary for us to be rescued by the same old tricks.
Exactly.
So let's look at another part of alchemy. Probably another place to begin is how it was described. We all have heard that alchemy has been described as a philosophy, and this is relatively true. We know one thing for sure, that it's not a religion. I like to think of alchemy as an idea that's pre-religious thought or before dogmas, that at one time was freely expressed, and it would step on dogmas, and it was this conflict with dogmas that made alchemy go underground or symbolic for its interpretations and meaning. So what we can say here, what's important to remember is alchemy is not the solution, but enables us to find new ways, because it conflicts with the absolutes that keep us fixed.
Well, it allows you to look through a filter of new and fresh ideas that allow you to come up with a better and maybe more functional interpretation.
Exactly. It evolves the thinking process. So let's get to the point two. This brings us to what the goal of what alchemy was. Well, the goal for the alchemists was to understand the spiritual structure of matter and mankind. If we take the word spiritual structure out and replace it with particle, we could probably get a more meaningful definition. So the goal for the alchemists was to understand the particle structure of matter, and this also included the evolving DNA code for humanity.
That would be your evolutionary change.
Exactly. And this is sort of what their primary type of thinking was. And there was a purpose for this, and we will get to it later. But two is alchemy at this particular point was divided into two schools of thought. You would have external alchemy, and external alchemy was the understanding of substances.
That would be the beginning of chemistry.
Exactly. Then we have something that was called internal alchemy. And internal or inner alchemy was an idea or an understanding of creation. The goal of inner alchemy was to understand the essence of what created matter. And when this was accomplished, it was called the lapis, the philosopher's egg, the philosopher's stone. Or more importantly, it was called the materia prima, which can be interpreted as the essence from which all is created.
That would be your divine influence in the science of alchemy.
What you could say here is today we call it the God particle.
The God particle.
Okay, so what we can say here is that alchemy has impacted our science more than we are aware of. And this could be why Einstein and Newton found his thoughts interesting. So what we could say here that just maybe there are no new ideas, but only the reinterpretation of old ideas proven through new technology.
It'd be the same as the this particle accelerator in Switzerland, where they're trying to find a God particle. The alchemy was concerned with trying to find spiritual nature of man.
Exactly, but both are the same because it's the God particle that they're looking for, which is the essence that the alchemist was looking for. It was just a difference in technology. You have an accelerator, or you have what was called the alchemical furnace.
Exactly.
Okay?
Mm-hmm.
So two is, when we begin to see here, is that alchemy was not a godless thought. That alchemy, even though it was not a religion, okay, it did have a concept of the divine. And for the alchemist, the divine was found or revealed within the essence of creation. They also had a concept for evil, but it wasn't a typical good versus evil. It was more a awareness of two realities from which the individual made a choice. So this brings us to our working definition of alchemy. For me, the working definition for alchemy is an ancient understanding of an evolving essence that produces a evolving creation. And it was the hopes of the alchemists to reveal the mysteries in order to help mankind to evolve for a more greater purpose. And it was when that process stopped that our problems began.
Okay, for me, it's a lens you can look through and discover how things are really working, and you can overlay it over what you already know, and you have a clearer vision of what you want to interpret.
Yes, what it does too, and this will be what it does, it brings different concepts to the picture. And probably too, this is what you're asking today, well, at least I hope so, is what does alchemy have to do this? And this has to do with Kevin's statement, is alchemy brings a different concepts. And these different concepts are relatively important because if we go back to our beginning, some of our beginning terms, okay, is that history is nothing more than a repetition of knowledge that supports a organization of concepts. And the key word here is concepts. And what alchemy does is alchemy brings to the table a different set of concepts that produces a different way of thinking. And to relate this to, this would relate to Einstein's statement, is you can't solve the problems with the same style of thinking that created them. So alchemy, with its new concepts, produces another way of thinking, which changes the paradigm. So in other words, we evolve the paradigm by changing how we think. And we change how we think by introduction of other concepts.
New concepts that allow you to realize that you cannot solve today's problems with today's thinking. In other words, garbage in, garbage out.
So what we have here too, the importance of alchemy, and then part two is we have to begin to understand that what are these new concepts that the alchemy brings into the picture? Well, they're really not new concepts, they're just a reinterpretation of ancient concepts. Let's begin, because two is once we understand that this is a addition to, when we can begin to see how it impacts us. So if we look at some of the ruling concepts of today, and what alchemy brings to this is the idea of a evolving creation versus concepts centered around authority, judgment, reward, punishment, good, evil. I'll let you I'll let you look at this. Which one do you think sounds right? One that is flexible, or ones that are more rigid and more absolute?
And in terms of the structure, alchemy says that instead of creating just a workforce for the benefit of the structure, the individual is served, and then in turn the structure is served.
Exactly. So what we're going to say here too, and we're going to pick up on Kevin's statement here too, because this has to do with the alchemical concept of self-worth. What we have today is how self-worth is determined. Self-worth is determined by the others. And what that means is self-worth is determined by what the culture values, what the economy values, what successful people value. And when self-worth is determined by that, you have an allocation of resources.
And these resources are instead of you creating a role for yourself, others determine your role, and instead of you using your gifts and talents that may be hidden, you have to function in a way that may be counter to your growth.
And what Kevin's saying here too, and this is a good idea here, because what happens here when it's used, when self-worth is used and determined by others, it's used to allocate resources, which creates a workforce for its benefit.
Exactly.
Okay, so you have to start thinking here is when you allow others to determine your self-worth, it is always for their benefit. And this type of concept divides us into winners and losers and allows us to throw people and cultures under the bus. And this is sort of something that we're getting too comfortable with. And the alchemeo idea of self-worth is an understanding of essence. The essence is an interpretation of essence for alchemy would be that everything mankind has been and will be. So in the alchemy interpretation, is self-worth is determined by that essence, and that essence means that everyone has gifts, contributions, something that enhances our future. And if we throw one person or throw one culture or throw a culture away, then we lose that potential. Because an alchemical interpretation of understanding is that we are all part of that mystery.
We all have a part of the equation.
Exactly. So if you throw one away, we lose something. The other part here too is the idea of learned knowledge versus talent. And this could be easily explained through Einstein. When Einstein said that my imagination was greater than my learned knowledge. So what we have here, we have to remember that Einstein would not have the credentials to teach today, but it was his imagination that changed the world of science. So what we have here is the idea, we can put it another way, that instead of knowledge shaping us, we shape knowledge. In this way, each of us, we begin to create our own role for our future.
And each contributes a piece of the toward the outcome.
Exactly, because I tell you what too is when people begin to determine their own role, then we have a new movement towards something else. Okay, things begin to change because new potentials are expressed. We are no longer just a workforce. We are individuals with high potentials to make things happen.
Not only do you accentuate the individual, but you can potentially make the structure better.
Okay, do you sort of see that what we're talking about here is the idea of evolutionary change versus a fixed structure, and the evolutionary change is always found within the masses. It is the masses that produces the new ideas. But at this particular point, masses individual thinking is not relevant to the equation because the equation is fixed. So I hope you found this introduction into alchemy interesting, and I hope you come back for our next videos. And this time I want to thank you for your time, and thanks everybody for viewing my other videos. And one last thought is we already know what these concepts have produced. Do you like what you see? Maybe it's time for us to take a chance and try something different. Because remember the old statement is we cannot have a perfect world, that is evident. But sometimes we may need to make it better. Sometimes it's only an excuse not to try. Thank you.